Today, you're going to be learning the 6 key ways to get more tenants into your apartment buildings. The problem is, most owners wait until units are empty to start even thinking about it. And the truth is, high occupancy isn't luck, it's a result of proactive systems, great resident experiences, and tight operations as well. Today, John and I are going to be breaking down the top strategies we use to keep occupancy rates high across over 500 unit portfolio and how you can do the same. Now, if you are interested in investing into real estate and you can't find any great deals out there, go to fulloutinvesting.com where we have a sample deal and you'll check out our 10-step full out investing process where you're going to learn how we're taking down these deals from start to finish. John, it's great to be here with you.
Mark, it's so good to be here. One thing I've learned in 20 years in business is that, bad operators, bad business owners blame the market, right? Oh, it's the market. The market's bad. That's why we're having these results. But, some of the biggest times we had the biggest trajectory of growth at my prior business, Mark Spain Real Estate, and I'll put Faris Capital Partners in that same kind of world because today is a challenging time in multifamily just for deal flow, right? So I say all that because, we get deals all the time. It takes 300 deals for us to find one deal that fits our stringent underwriting criteria that we're confident enough to put out that letter of intent on. And I see these deals, Mark, with 70%, occupancy in a market where, rent is in demand, right? And so I just really, this is a conversation I'm so excited to have because I would say that it is always on the operator, right? Yes, are extreme circumstances that could occur, but where there's a will, there's a way, where there's creativity, there's a solution. And so I think if, an investor, an operator, or even if you're just owning a rental property, if you keep these steps in mind, you can thrive in any market.
Yeah, 100%. And to just say, well, the market is slow, that's why we have low occupancy, to me is being an effect of the market, as in you don't, it's not that taking that 100-0 mindset. When I say 100-0 mindset is 100% responsibility and zero excuses.
That's
And
right.
so for us, we're always looking at what do we have in our control that we can look after regardless of whatever the market. Say a new apartment that came in, first off, we'd be looking at, okay, did we know about that? Did we do proper research? Because we can track number of new permits coming to a market. So that shouldn't be a surprise. So first off, John, we're looking at, okay, we missed that. If that ever were to come up, we got to make sure that we add stricter checklists and processes to make sure we never miss it again. So we learn from that. But then the next step is, okay, what can we control? What can we do on our end to be able to position our asset to be a more favorable or shiny penny asset to be able to get the resident to say, yeah, I want to come over to a Fair's residence building versus the alternative.
That's right. Should go without saying occupancy matters a lot when it comes to investing in apartments. But some of the key factors, right, is that at the end of the day, cash is oxygen. We've said that probably 20 times on this podcast. But, if your vacancy dips and you get into a place where you're upside down, you're not generating enough cash to pay all your bills, then you're going to just be on a downward slope that's going to be very hard to dig yourself out of. So, in a softening market or a high interest rate environment, that cash is critical. Really good operators should prioritize occupancy above and beyond anything else. And that's why at our daily morning huddles, our, senior vice president of asset management, Georgia, is reporting on those occupancy numbers on a daily basis. Now, it's funny, even when I first suggested it, I was like, well, not a lot's going to change day to day. So maybe it's weekly. I said, no, let's look at it every day. Because, what I've noticed is, occasionally we have a deal where it's like, gosh, we've been hovering at that 92 for a couple weeks. What's the latest? And then that prompts a conversation. Should we look at our marketing efforts? How are we doing on speed to lead? Are we doing the right things, right, to manage these properties? And so having that daily visibility is so critical. And at the end of the day, every vacant unit is lost revenue. That's just the bottom line. Now, there are strategic reasons we have a vacancy. For example, when we're renovating that unit, right, and we're going to make it better and be able to target a higher rent. But, part of that is making sure that we have the systems in place so we minimize even that vacancy, right? We can turn these units in 3 weeks, sometimes shorter,
Right.
because we pre-buy our materials. So it's all about occupancy. So every thought we have into this process when we own this building is wrapped around how do we maintain the highest level of occupancy while also pushing rents. Now, I think it is worth mentioning that occupancy isn't the only thing because we also have to look at rent growth, right? So are we hitting the rent growth targets
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
projected? And so in other words, you don't necessarily want 100% occupancy because that may mean you're not pushing rents hard enough. For us, that sweet spot is like 95 to 97% occupancy. If we're hitting that, we know we're pushing hard enough on rents, but not pushing so hard our vacancy is dropping, or rising, I should say. But it is all about that daily focus, that monomaniacal focus on everything around occupancy.
100%. And so, John, before we get into the six key strategies, I'm going to share we'll say the foundational piece that I think makes everything go much smoother. You and I, we've had many, many conversations on this. And so, before even, which the first one is start with a great tenant screening and onboarding experience. Before you even get there, the key is what is the property showcasing as not only online from photos, but then when they actually come through that walkthrough, the preparation ahead of time is so critical. So think of this: you're selling your house, okay? What do most homes do to get more money before you sell your home? You go in and you properly stage it ahead of time, and you think about what is the buyer actually going to experience when they come through the property. And so what's interesting that I found, John, is in the apartment space, it's almost like, oh, we don't need to worry about staging. We don't need to worry about that first, experience when residents walk up. It's just like it is what it is. Especially for us, because we're buying B class assets. This is working class. Our rents are between 1,500 to 2,000 a month, so that's more affordable. And so with you and I coming in, we have that residential background where we've gone in, we've seen once you go in and stage it ahead of time, you create that wow ahead of time, you curate what that feeling is. So not only the quality of the renovations, but also once you do renovate, say the model suite in the leasing center, staging it and taking that step. And so this is the biggest, say, shortfall that I've seen in this space is that it's not being done well.
Yeah.
And if you stage it like you would be pretend you're selling it, the resident experience will be much greater and it's going to make you stand out. And if you do that, not only that, the photos online are going to be much greater. So you're going to be able to attract more people to come in ahead of time. So this is like the foundational piece. If you look at your apartment like you're actually selling it and you prepare it that way, I'm not talking about spending a lot of money. You can stage it very inexpensively, but if you could pretend it's going to be a buyer actually coming in and buying it, that mindset will make you stand out ahead of time. So there's some pre-work, or we'll call it the foundational piece, that's going to make these six strategies that we're going to share with you go so much smoother.
Yeah. Well, Mark, it's interesting because, right, it's the idea of first impressions. And in residential real estate, we've talked about this before, but, when I would work with a buyer, I could generally tell this was the right house for them when we rounded the corner and saw it just from a distance, even from that first time. You could just sense the buyers, light up a little bit, right? Like that curb appeal. And so, one of the first things we do when we take down a new asset, I mean, typically within the first few days, we put up all new signage, right? We immediately start our 28-day transformation, which we'll dive more deeply into here in this podcast shortly. But creating that great first impression, new landscaping, new signage, and it makes such a big difference. And, candidly, we've been around deals with operators that didn't take those steps. And now they're year 2, year 3 of their investment, and they're wondering why they're not able to get those rents that they had targeted. And it's like, well, you spent $4,000 on a sign. It looks like it was made out of plywood and someone slapped a sticker on
Yeah.
it, where we buy like a concrete, substantial monument sign. And, it's just those little things that make a big difference, all the way down to the experience in the leasing center with a refrigerator fully stocked and organized with great snacks and sparkling water and bottled water and just all those various things. And that experience is so important because for me, and I know you agree, a resident renting apartment wants that same pride in their living situation that a homeowner does. They want to feel really good when they pull in at the end of the day and just go, oh, yeah, this is nice. It's clean. It feels safe. I'm not stepping over cigarette butts and trash on the way to my unit. There's not trash laid out in the
Yeah.
breezeways. Like everything's clean and tight. If I have friends come over for the weekend, I feel pride in having them come through. And by the way, it was interesting when we talked about the model units. And I'm not poking. I mean, we love our property management companies, but they were like, oh, it's unnecessary. You don't really need to do that. And we said, no, we're going to do it. And it got so popular. Like we literally have shopping carts, because all the stuff we buy for like Wayfair and Amazon, it looks great, but it's affordable. We're watching the bottom line, right? We're not going out and buying like, restoration hardware stuff or whatever. We're just buying some nice stuff on Wayfair that looks good. We actually have a QR code in our leasing centers because people like our model unit so much. They're like, where can I buy that couch? Where can I buy that, bistro table? And so it's now something that we're like, we don't get anything from it. It's just a nice value add for our residents.
Actually, John,
People ask for that.
that's a good idea. We should offer that as a service there for residents, where we can actually look after all that for them as
Yeah,
part of their
yeah,
move-in package. That's a good one.
yeah, maybe.
I
Yeah,
didn't think
yeah.
of that.
Take it a
That's
step further. Yeah,
But what's to build on what you're saying, John,
yeah,
the key there is that if you don't properly stage and take professional photos online, the metric, you won't be able to know how much you've lost. That's the thing. It's a hidden cost that you'll never know how much it cost you because they just weren't impressed with the online presentation. But if you go the extra mile and make it a real wow and cause that differentiation, that's where you're gonna see that over the long term, and you know that you didn't miss anybody, which is the key. And it's the same with residential. We know that stage homes and professional marketing, they attract more buyers to come in, and when they do come in, they're going to be more sold on it because they've been looking at those photos well ahead of time, and they got really excited, and they want to. There's that law of consistency or the rule of consistency that Cialdini talks about. It's like if they pre-decided that this is really good, they're going to try and match up to that
yeah.
versus them going and seeing crappy photos and they come in and they're not excited with that. And so that is a sunk cost that you'll never know how much it costs you unless you do this right from the beginning.
That's right. We track metrics is all over our business. And so, for example, we get reports from Google on a monthly basis showing the just the online activity, how many people found us online, how many people clicked to call, how many people went to the website, et cetera. And so, as an operator, because I actually learned this in residential real estate, right? It's the idea that if we're getting leads or we're getting hits on the site, but nobody's booking an appointment, then something's off with the marketing. We need to make some adjustments, right? And if we're getting the leads but nobody's booking, then there might be something wrong with the sales or the leasing process, right? So you always have to have these metrics so you know where in your process you have those constraints. And so it was interesting with our newest deal, Strawberry Station. We have a really great photographer in Charleston, and he comes out multiple times because we like before and after photos. So he had come out, taken some fresh photos, but we had not yet staged the model unit. And it was interesting for that week because they're great photos, we had them up. We didn't want to delay. You could see it in the traffic. The second we staged it, boom, the amount of clicks started to go up, the amount of book tours started to go up. So to me, it's like I already knew it was working, but that was like the proof right there. I mean, the data showed it very clearly. And so, Mark, when I go on apartments.com, you'd be shocked how many operators out there have an exterior photo. And by the way, the oddest thing, they include photos of the leasing center. It's like, who cares about the leasing center? I mean, maybe you have it in there amongst 60 photos. But to me, it should be the apartment, the amenities, and then if you want to show off your leasing center, great. But at the end of the day, the leasing centers, they go in there once a month, maybe to check on something. It's what's in it for them, right? And so highlighting the actual unit itself. But you'd be surprised how often you see it's just somebody got some photos, some marketing person slammed them up there, but nobody ever went and looked at it to see if it made sense, if it flowed properly. It would be kind of like, posting a residential home and just showing the backyard and then the kitchen's like the 75th photo. It's like, no, kitchens and bathrooms sell homes. Like, get those in there first, the master suite, and then you kind of work your way through the rest of the house. So, it has to be logical. So, these things are difficult. It just takes a little bit of thought and a little bit of extra effort. And we talk about this all the time, Mark, but to me, that's what most people miss. They get like 95 or 90% right. They just miss that last 5 to 10%, right? And it's just to really seal it.
100%. And this is where putting yourself in the other person's shoes is like, that is the best decision maker when you're making decisions like this. Because if I was a renter and I'm looking at assets, if you put yourself there emotionally when you're watching through, apartments.com and you're sifting and sorting of which ones you're going to actually go and check out, if you're looking at 3 or 4, there might be one that's like, oh, that's ugly. And one's like, wow, that's really exciting. And emotionally, how am I going to be moved to take that next step
Yeah.
or not? And so that's where, as an operator, it's very difficult sometimes when you're looking at the numbers, if you don't have this perspective and putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Now, If you don't have that, it's very easy to say it just doesn't matter. That the number of competition is the reason, and you're competing based on rate, thinking that we're all the same. But you and I both know, John, that ideas can be sold and feelings can be sold for higher numbers based on how much value people see in that. And so one apartment, say if it's an older apartment, the reality there is that you can sell that for maturity, and but it's got to showcase really well online. And so we put ourselves in the resident's shoes from right from the beginning. When they're online looking at these properties, what are they going to feel when they look at our website, when they look at our apartments, and are they going to be moved to take that next action emotionally? And by us putting ourselves in their shoes, it helps us better roll out the, we'll say, the resident experience or the resident onboarding, which we're going to get into here now, John. But I think that conversation as a foundation piece to the six that we're going to share with you is it adds juice to every single talking point that we're about to go over. It makes everything, we'll call it like the oil in between, the gears. It just makes everything move better, and the overall result is much, much greater.
That's right. 100%. So really, number one, where it starts is, really great screening. Now, the screening is important for so many reasons. Number one, we need to make sure we're bringing in residents that have the ability to pay, that will be a good fit for the community. So we're doing criminal background checks. That's what I mean by fit, right? Like we wouldn't want somebody coming in that, has assault and all kinds of different crazy things on their criminal history. Once again, that ability to pay on time. So looking at the rent income ratio, their credit scores, et cetera. And but the other side of it is making that an easier process, right? So it should be like 75 pieces of paperwork. They should be able to fill it out online in the leasing center, make it really easy. We still need to do that work, but it shouldn't feel like a homework, right? Or some challenging, difficult thing for the residents. So we leverage online platforms that make it very easy. But beyond that, and this is another area I think a lot of operators miss, is really the onboarding, right? And you see it in businesses across industries, right? They're great at the sale, but once the person's in network and they're working with the company, it's like they don't know how to use the product, or there's nobody like that customer success person to help walk them through and navigate to make sure they get the most out of it. So that leads to churn, right? In our world, that would look like a non-renewal. So welcome kits, the guarantees we offer, that speedy service being one that I think is really important to our residents. The other two guarantees that we've talked about in the past are great, gives them peace of mind to start the process and sign the lease. But by having that speedy service, knowing if something goes wrong in my unit, these folks are going to get on it very quickly within 24 hours and they're going to solve for it. But welcome kit, right? So maybe some shower curtains, a couple rolls of paper towels, some dish soap. When people are moving into the unit and they're unpacking, maybe there's a box buried somewhere with all their kitchen supplies, but hey, we got you some soap, a sponge, and a couple rolls of paper towels, right? Just to make it easy. Um, those things just really just solidify that first impression, and it affirms that they made the right decision by, leasing with us and moving in. So, it's just super important to make sure that that whole process is very smooth. In fact, we were actually at our Goose Creek property, and one of the maintenance supervisors just chatting with him. We were talking about just common things that come up. And he said, it's interesting. It's stuff that you wouldn't expect, but it's somebody putting like Dawn dish soap in their washing machine, or their dishwasher, I should say. And so the whole thing bubbles up, right? And you go, well, that's crazy. Who would do that? But guess what? They might be 22 and this might be their first apartment, right? Nobody ever told them that there's a different detergent you put in your dishwasher and you don't just use the Dawn soap. So we challenged him because he had this great idea. Like, let's create like basically almost like a manual for your apartment. If this happens, do this. If this happens, do that. And so just little simple things like that just add up to a really big whole. In fact, even before they sign, right? Like we're giving them information about amenities in the area, the local parks, entertainment, where the shopping's located, where the schools are located, just little things like that, just to show that we're thoughtful and that we care. And it's like you said, we're putting ourselves in their shoes. What are they thinking about? Is this a good location? Is my kid going to be able to walk to school? Is there a bus stop nearby? Just putting all that out there and putting that together. It takes a few minutes on our side, but makes a great first impression. And, as they say, you only get one chance to make a great first impression. So we got to nail that on the front
Mm.
end.
Yeah, for sure. And so I'm going to get into just briefly here the when somebody comes in for that first, we'll say they're screening and onboarding, right? But there's that first welcome walkthrough step checklist
Oh
that
yeah.
we follow, right? And so this is something that we sat down ahead of time and said, okay, what do we want we'll say that first welcome to look like? And so this is where John and I we sat down and we actually with our asset manager Georgia and we said, okay, here's what the rollout of that, we'll say that whole walkthrough of that first experience when a new resident comes on. So they check online, they reach out, okay, and then what does that phone call look like? And then from there, when they come in, they welcome. We have a curated list, checklist, and a walk path for the residents when they come in to be able to experience everything and to get all the steps along the way checked off, so to speak, before we actually ask for the order. And so, that consists of like a personalized welcome that consists of talking about the guarantees and the mission of the community and the values of the community and the amenities. We travel along the right walk path, and then we go to the model suite. We take them and we show them the wow kitchen, the wow fridge, so to speak, and they get little goodies, and they come back around through the gym that we upgraded, and then come back through, and we talk about the area. We'll say key amenities that are in the area, and they come back, and then we sit them down, and from there, then we ask for the application from there, and so we actually curated and mapped it out.
Yeah.
So John, maybe you can kind of add to that what that actually looked like, which is, to me, that is so pivotal because John, you and I, like, we've walked through a lot of different assets, and it's basically like, here's the sheet. Yeah, let me know if you're interested. Versus like, it's pre decided what
Yes.
that experience is actually going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, we took it as far so we have a site map of every one of our properties, right? We can really just start with like a good plat map and then we send it to our marketing department who make it look pretty. And we literally, it is mapped out. It's like you start in the leasing center, then you move to the posters in the leasing center, then you move to the event. And so it's not just like a bunch of suggestions, it is a curated, like structured tour. And what we're trying to do there is a couple of things. We're one, getting to know them. That's kind of the first step,
Yeah.
just learning a little bit about them, what they're looking for in their newest living situation. But most importantly, like, what have they not liked about prior living arrangements that they've had? What sometimes surfaces, well, there wasn't really enough parking. And, my son parked in a spot and his car got towed or something like that. And, that was just very frustrating, cost us $400. We just don't want that to happen again. So we're taking note of that. So as we walk through, the building and we're in maybe say the parking lot, we can point out that actually, we have a lot of great parking here. In fact, we have, 3 spots per, unit available. Of course, not everybody's using that, but no concerns here. If it was an amenity that they were looking for, the gym, for example, we're going to spend some time and really highlight that. So basically what we're trying to do is uncover what their kind of pain points are, if you will, and how we can help them solve that. So it's not so much that we're selling, we're just uncovering, we're in a process of curiosity, learning
Mm,
about them, and then providing them with solutions that will help them with those pain points or
mm,
those problems. So,
yeah.
it's interesting, like a lot of salespeople, and I've been in sales pretty much my whole career, and I've spent a lot of time training salespeople. And a lot of great salespeople are like, oh, I know this stuff. I got it. I got it. And so I wouldn't say there was resistance, but there was initially when we rolled this out of like, well, I got a good program. It was almost like they thought they were doing something wrong. And it's like, no, no, no. What we're trying to do is just enhance what you're already doing and just taking it up a notch, taking it up a level. And so when they implement it, we see an immediate result. In fact, we have waiting lists at Largo. We have a waiting list at Monk's Corner, Goose Creek. We're just about a hair away from a waiting list. So implementing these things makes such a big difference. But at the end of the day, this is all about the resident. And so that's what this is designed around. It's not about our needs or my wants or whatever. It's about what does the resident want? Let's just show it to them, make it really easy for them to make a decision. And guess what? Maybe we're not the best fit for them. Maybe we're lacking something. We're happy to let them know that. But at the end of the day, it's all about that resident making sure that their needs are met. So that's what that
Yeah.
whole walk tour was designed to do.
And John, you adding the questions in on that is so key because the walk path is one thing, but the discovery is so pivotal. And so, what we're doing during that walk path there as well, essentially to boil it down, is we want to know what is important to them, what are they looking for, So that's sort of a number of curated questions. And then we want to identify what's the main problem standing in their way, as John had mentioned. And then from there, we want to go ahead and empathize, let them know we understand where they're coming from with that. And then we want to offer them the solution. We're going to be selling the main features of the building that's going to solve their problem and what they're
Yeah.
looking for. And so we can only figure that out if you're asking really good questions. And the property managers need to have some guidance as to what that looks like. And so, John, that's where, with our background and helping people through that, that's what creates I will say, an emotional connection with a potential, all the potential residents that come in, that would further differentiate our building compared to, the three or four others that are gonna, are on their checklist to be able to go look at that before they actually make a full decision.
No, 100%. Yeah, it's all about, once again, all about the resident and that first impression. That's what we're trying to solve for with that first step. Now, the second step is proactively like monitoring your renewals, right? And so, what can be very frustrating for a resident is getting an email 2, 3 weeks before their lease renews saying, like, hey, here's your updated lease, sign this, right? And that's what a lot of operators do. We're going out at least 90 days in advance so we know who's, coming up for renewal. We're proactively reaching out to these people, not through email and text, but like knocking on their door or trying to catch them in the community and just checking in. How's everything going? Are you satisfied with your living? Well, your renewal's coming up. Are you interested in renewing? Wonderful. So we start that process early. It just goes back to the early bird gets the worm. We want to start that process early. It's all about speed of execution. So, what we sometimes do, we don't have to do this a lot, but maybe offer a small incentive, like not even monetary. Maybe it's just, hey, if you do this, get this signed early, we'll get you, something, a little something. But often we don't even have to do that. But what we need to know is that if we do find out that somebody plans to non-renew, now we have 90 days to think about putting somebody in that. We can start actively advertising that unit for rent and line it up with somebody whose timing aligns with that resident's move out. But that is super critical, that proactive, because number one, it's a better experience for the resident. They're not, surprised or shocked. People get busy, right? Like they may not be thinking, oh, I leased this place in June. I need to be ready for my renewal. It's May. So reaching out 90 days in advance. And then, our asset manager, by the way, is doing this. We don't just leave it with the property management company. They're doing it as well, but she's actively looking at it. It just comes back to planning like, oh, we have a upcoming. So let's go ahead and order a couple renovation packs. So their day that resident moves out, that package is there and ready, and we can start that renovation process. So it's beyond just resident experience, it's just purely operational as well. So monitoring those renewals, staying well ahead of them, will lead to much better results and much higher propensity for renewals.
100%, John. And so you gotta imagine you want to make it easy for the resident. And so if you like you nailed it, you don't want to leave it to the last minute, because if you leave it to the last minute and you rely on them to reach out to you, now you're making them take that extra step. And you got to imagine that, there are a lot of other, we'll say, apartments that they have friends that are living in, and their friends are saying, hey, why don't you come move over here? You want to catch them and have that conversation before they start thinking, I got to move, my renewal's coming up, I'm going to start looking around. You want to be able to lock them up when before they start thinking about that. And by reaching out, you become the easy option, that
Yeah.
easy button. And so people generally do the path of least resistance. And if you make them jump through a bunch of hoops, you're going to get more leakage with
Yeah.
that. So that's why for us, like 90 days is something we're reaching out, and we're not leaving it to last minute, because we want to make it easy for them to say, hey, listen, yeah, let's just do a renewal for another year so that
Yeah.
you don't need to think about it anymore.
Well, people make better decisions when they're not under stress, right? So 90 days out, like they're not necessarily thinking, "Oh, I better start looking for that other apartment or I need to make a change." And plus it also just gives us an opportunity to maybe surface a concern that the resident has that we didn't know
Right.
about.
That's
Hey,
good.
if we solve for that, can we
Yeah,
get your renewal,
that's good.
right? It's in touch. And I would say, that's, almost like this overall theme here is like our property managers are generally on a first name basis with the majority of the residents in their community. They see them daily. They're talking to them in the parking lot. They're checking in. We survey our residents from time to time. But a lot of people do suffer in silence. Like they're not the type that are going to send in an email or come to the office and
Yeah.
complain. They'll just say, I just don't like it. I'm going to move on. So that proactive communication sometimes surfaces things that maybe the resident just would have held on to and not shared with us. So asking those questions. Are you satisfied? Is there anything else we could be doing for you? Just makes such a big difference, right? And that's bottom line. Like generally, in my experience, I know personally when I have a bad client experience issue, I just want to be heard and I want a solution. That's all. Like, just help me, with my problem, right? And so just by being proactive, it makes a huge difference. And that's often where we can uncover some easy things we can overcome to keep that resident in there with a nice, healthy renewal that keeps our pro forma in line and keeps our budget going strong.
Yeah, right on. So next one we're looking at is pricing to the market, not the performa. And so this is where it becomes really important to have real understanding of what's happening in your marketplace. So understanding what the comparable properties are charging for rents. We're looking at overall market data as well. And so, John, maybe you can talk a little bit about the software tools that we're using to be able to help us have a better understanding of the marketplace and current rents.
Yeah, so we leverage third-party property management software. Now, what these software are able to do is they're able to take data from all the operators in their kind of system, right? And so we can kind of see what other buildings in the area are leasing units for. Sometimes that data is anonymized, but sometimes we can actually see the building itself. So we can get a sense of what's happening in the area to see if we maybe need to make an adjustment. Now, I will say that generally we tend to operate our buildings. We try not to get too deep into that. I mean, we look at the data to be very clear, but there are many examples where maybe the Class A building that just delivered down the street is having issues with their lease up, and we don't want to react to something that isn't really impacting us. So we also have to be very mindful that just because it's happening over there, there could be other reasons that are creating that issue. So there are algorithmic pricing features that are built into the software. We don't really leverage those. In other words, on a daily basis, it might tweak your rent $5, $10. But what we really look at is just the market so we know what's happening in the area. Are other operators offering concessions? Interestingly, when we talk about concessions, I think people listening to this might immediately think, oh, a reduction in the rent itself or a rebate on rent. But what often can really get the job done is a $200 flat screen TV from Target or Walmart,
Yeah, sure.
So just little things like that. So we haven't really had to dip too much into that in our current portfolio, but it's not to say we wouldn't if that would help us get it, because I'd rather get a 5% rent lift and pay somebody, get somebody a $200 TV than keep our rent,
Mm,
stagnant and, say we're happy we did it. At the end of the day, a empty unit is a drag on your cash flow. I mean, there's just no income coming in, but there's also expenses that are accruing because we still have to maintain that property. So pride should never get in the way. If you find yourself in a situation as an operator where there are some market headwinds and maybe some competition has come on the market, better to bring people in at a slightly reduced rate and then just kill them with service. So then on the
mm,
renewal, you can
yeah,
get caught back up. But I will say we've been, I would say, fortunate in the sense that we've selected our investments well in markets that are infill markets that don't have a lot of new supply coming online. Now, the broader area might, but the little submarket we in does not. So that is part of our underwriting criteria. You said it. We're looking at permits. We're trying to buy in areas that we don't need to worry about what's going to happen in 2 years, right? Because we can see that as of today, there's no permits, right?
mm,
But just looking at that performance, that cuts the other way, right? Because sometimes, I mean, and I would say in most cases today, we're actually exceeding our pro forma
yeah.
rents. So it just goes back to just paying attention to what the residents are saying, looking at your reviews, looking at what you got on the last lease, and then making an intelligent decision based on that data at hand.
100%. And that you nailed it. It's actually working the other way for us now, as in if we just stuck with the performa, we'd be leaving money on the table because we're actually getting, in some cases, our renovated projected rents, we're getting higher than that without even renovating.
Right.
And we have a wait list for a number of these. So that's where letting the market dictate value, I think, is really important. Understanding what's going on, but then being able to push it. And so that's where for us, John, our our perspective with providing so much value and then letting the market dictate what that is
Yeah.
has been working really well. Our last four assets were overshooting our projected renovated rents because we're adding a lot of value, and the market is dictating what that value is, which is actually quite a bit higher than what the competing market rents are. And
That's right.
so that's what I want to play that game all day long. Provide value and then let the market dictate. And the way you do that is you keep raising rents until the market says, okay, you know what, that's too high, and then you got to bring it down. And I love your idea that you had mentioned there, John, because it works so well. Is doesn't $200 off your rent is not like a $200 TV.
Yeah.
There's just more value. Oh, I get a TV out of this. That's a great
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
So I think that being creative with your offering and then letting the market dictate value by giving a lot and then seeing where the market will pay you for that value provided.
That's it. That's absolutely right. So, this really, I would say, is the most critical of these 6 key strategies. And, we, in a sense, touched on it with that onboarding, but it's all about consistent resident experience, right? And so, one thing I'd like to talk about, Mark, I kind of teased it earlier, but, how do we create that experience? Well, reality is these buildings sometimes trade, I mean, on average every 5 to 7 years. So, for example, the property in Largo, it's interesting. We received a review about 6 months ago from a gentleman who'd been over there 11 years, and he said, I've been here for 11 years and I've seen 4 different ownership groups in that amount of time. So just imagine that every time, this guy turns around every 2 or 3 years, some new owner owns the building. And he said, some were good, some were bad, right? And so he was posting this review because we had just blown him away. Like after 11 years, he was like, now I know what great looks like. And so it was an awesome review. We love to see it. But there are some operators that buy a new building and then nothing really changes. They might be renovating the interiors, but they didn't really do anything to the amenities. The pool furniture is still tired. The gym has old equipment and it's kind of stinky in there because they don't clean it properly or whatever the circumstances are. And then they're going in and asking for more rent, right? And so residents are like, well, wait, what, why should I be paying more rent? I haven't received anything. So we innovated this 28-day full out transformation really before we took down our first deal. I think you were looking around and kind of seeing like, what could we do that would be a little bit different, that would make a big impact? And so we've executed on this 28-day transformation on every one of our buildings. And the main idea is that we want to come in and add value for the residents before we ask for anything in return. And so what that looks like is painting the exteriors, putting in, modern colors, redoing all the signage, new door hardware, new lighting in the breezeways. I mean, that's a big one, Mark. A lot of the buildings we've toured, they have these old, like 20-year-old, light fixtures and the bulbs are kind of yellow and it's dark and dingy looking. But the property's clean, but the light is making it look dingy. So putting nice, bright, clear lights. So when somebody comes in at 10 o'clock at night, maybe they worked a later shift or whatever, they see everything. They feel very safe and secure. We update the amenities. I mentioned earlier, like the monument signs, one of the first things we do, we pressure wash, we put in new landscaping. And so the residents get wind, oh, there's a new owner, but immediately they see action. They see stuff going on and they see their community get better looking. Now, I'm going to speak to Largo here because Largo is interesting. It's these 104 units on one side of the street. On the other side of the street, the original building developer had built that property first and then came across the street and did 104 more units. So they were never sold together, but they were built by the same builder. So aesthetically look similar and all that. And so when we came in and we did our 28-day transformation, we had people just start walking across the street saying, I want in over here. Like, I don't know what's going on over here, but it's tired. My railing, it's made out of wood and it's like rotted and I don't even feel safe going out on my back deck. And, over here, I'm seeing painting, pressure washing, fresh pool furniture, like all this great stuff. And so that first impression makes such a big difference. And then on top of that, those current residents go, okay, I get it. Like I'm actually receiving something here. So when they get that new lease renewal and the rent maybe goes up 3, 4, 5%, they're happy to pay it because they feel like they've got something in return. So that really creates a great experience for our current residents and then sets the stage as new potential residents come through because they're just seeing a beautiful, like freshly manicured property. This extends all the way to clean common areas, Mark. I mean, you and I, like, man, when we tour these properties, like we usually have a little plastic baggie we're carrying around and we're picking up trash. And we make sure the property managers understand that this is not just something you do to prepare when Mark and John and Georgia or whoever are coming into town. Like every day you need to walk the property and pick up the trash. It is what it is. You got 104 units at Largo, 144 in Charleston. people don't mean to do it, but stuff falls out of their pockets, or a kid drops a candy wrapper, or somebody throws down a cigarette butt. But, this is people's home. This is where they live. They don't want to be stepping over garbage and cigarette butts. So making sure the common areas are very clean. We walk behind every building, we walk through every breezeway, and we give real-time feedback. Like, I'm literally texting the property manager as I'm walking through saying, "Hey, this is on unit 33B, like the dryer vent is stuffed with, lint, like we got to get that cleaned up immediately." Resident events, right? Frequent communication and check-ins, those guarantees I mentioned. People leave properties, but they stay for that experience, right? And when they feel like they have a sense of community where they know the people in the leasing center, the property manager and leasing manager care for them, they know their kids' names and what they do for a living, man, that's the secret right there. It really boils down
Yeah.
to all that.
100%. And so going back to business, you can learn a lot from taking all of your past experiences through the years, right? Over decades, John, running businesses. And what we figured out is that most people leave companies because they're leaving their manager. They're leaving their manager. And so you can take that same philosophy into these communities, and that majority of people, when they leave the community, it's like if the property manager is rude, that's a big reason why they're leaving the community, is because the property manager, they're not responding to maintenance requests. And the property manager is treating them like a number. They're rude. But we found that with majority of the communities, the residents that stay longer term, they love the property manager.
Yep.
And so for us, the first thing we do when you take this asset over, and John, everything you said, this is like I'm adding on top of
Yeah,
that,
yeah, that's right.
because when we take that very first is about giving as fast as possible, as fast as possible. It's like day one, we're on the property, we're executing on this plan, and the mission there is to change the culture as fast as possible. So putting our mission statement and our core values up on the wall and changing the property manager out for majority of the time to make sure that's a wow factor when the property manager is meeting somebody for the first time. But you had said it, is building relationships with the residents. We found that when you get that right, the occupancy, the renewal rate, the overall projected rents, everything just works so much better if you have somebody that's a wow at looking after the property on a day-to-day basis. And so, they leave for they're not having a great experience, and at the center of that is the property manager. So we really factor that in as a major decision maker when we take an asset over on who is going to be managing it, because the success of that property that is there, I'm talking about on a day-to-day basis, generally the leasing agent and then also the property manager there that's communicating. If you can get that right, the resident experience goes up drastically and that property thrives in a whole other way.
Yeah, we get heavily involved in that hiring process. In fact, working with third-party property managers, generally they'll bring those people to the operator. We actually go out, run that hiring process, and deliver our selection to the property management company. So one thing I've learned is, like, you can teach people system and process. You can't teach them to care about people. It's
That's
just
right.
something you either got or you don't, right? Or something you've learned over your career. It is a skill you can learn. But if they don't have it on day one, we're not going to bring that person on. And through our three-step interview process, we're really, it's never perfect. We're often able to kind of isolate and bring those people, that kind of thing out, right? It was interesting. We actually had a candidate we really liked at one point, and it was the final interview. And I was asking her about a maintenance request issue, and literally, I mean, I was shocked that she would just tell the story. She said, "Well, the request came in at 5:30 on a Friday. We technically close at 5, so yeah, I followed back up on Monday." And by the way, this was like a leak, like a water leak. And so the whole time I'm sitting here thinking, like, so you just allowed potentially thousands of dollars of damage to the property accumulate over the weekend because it came in at 5. Like, that just doesn't compute with me. Now, look, these are, salaried employees, and we don't expect them to work 7 days a week, like 24 hours a day. But when there's a major issue at the bill, yeah, we expect you to take care of it, right? Like, that shouldn't be something we have to teach or tell you. So clearly we ruled that candidate out, but that just showed it's like that sense of urgency, the care for the person and the care for the investor, the care for the asset just wasn't there. So we try to ask questions that'll help, sort of like reveal
Mm.
whether this person truly cares or if they're just here to collect a paycheck. And so that was such a great example. We're like, oh, you're gone. You're done. I mean, spend 4 hours with the person, but we were ready to walk away because they just whiffed that question in such a
Yeah,
major way.
for sure.
Um, yeah, so I somewhat touched on this before, but that leasing process should be frictionless as possible. There are documents that have to be filled out. We need credit authorizations, criminal history authorization. So leveraging an online tool that makes that easy for the person to do is a step in that direction. We also leverage a product called 365 Tour, and what that allows for, someone can scan a QR code, upload a copy of their driver's license, and a few other key pieces of data, so we know who they are, and then by doing that, they can gain access to a code where they can get, sort of after hours access. Now, I will say, I said 24 hours. The reality is we do limit it. We don't want people touring at, midnight. I mean, it would be a disruption to the residents and just not a good thing. But, if they're just, there on a Sunday afternoon and we happen not to be there, they can take that tour on their own, or maybe somebody's busy. So, meet people where they're at. So it's self-guided tour, flexible showing hours. So, for example, at all of our properties, we do open on Saturdays. A lot of leasing centers are Monday through Friday. It's, to me, it's like a bit like car. I don't know why, but in Georgia, like car dealerships are closed on Sunday, and I just can never wrap my mind around that. It's like, isn't Saturday and Sunday the key time people would be searching for cars? So it just goes back to Saturdays are a time when people aren't generally working, depending on their schedule. It's a great time to go look at apartments. So we just make sure there's somebody in the leasing center on Saturdays, so they split their schedules. So they have a weekday off, so they're working 5 days a week. But, think about the current resident experience. Something goes wrong on a Saturday, right? So another thing we do is we actually have a online platform where people can submit maintenance request items and it blasts out to the team. So if that means that the maintenance tech has to come in on a Sunday or call in a trade to get it done, they're going to do that. So it's something we're monitoring 7 days a week, even though the office is only open 6 days a week. And it's just, you've told that story before about your hair, your barber there who just couldn't get them to fix the toilet. And after 5 or 7 years, however long in that bill, he said, you know what? Forget this. I'm moving somewhere else. Right. I mean, over a leaky toilet, like that could have probably been fixed for $50 and just a little bit of effort, and focus. So, make it easy. I think that's really, and we think about that all over our business. And I think friction is something every
Yeah.
entrepreneur operator should be thinking about. Where in your process is there stress or friction, and just try to get rid of it or minimize it as much as possible. So that leasing process, not only from signing the paperwork, but touring the property, getting maintenance requests done, it should be easy. It shouldn't
Mm.
be a challenge. They shouldn't have to chase somebody down, right? It should
Well,
just be very easy.
and that's where our speed of execution core value comes into play. It's like any day that goes by without you following up, without you moving the resident along to the next step, it is very we'll say it's very costly,
Yes.
very costly, because if you miss out on that perfect resident and they move on to somebody else, well, you just missed a big opportunity.
Yeah.
So we want to be able to move quickly, not only with new leads that are coming in and converting them, and going through the approval process to make sure that we get the right ones in, but if you wait too long, they could go and sign another lease somewhere else and you miss them. If you
Yeah.
wait too long on maintenance requests, that's why we have that 48-hour concession. If we don't look after a maintenance request in 48 hours, we'll give them a concession to hold us accountable. And so
Yeah.
we build these little, we call them catalytic mechanisms, ways to force us to be able to deliver and higher customer service. But speed is important, and it does add to your bottom line. Any sort of, when you start studying Six Sigma and lean manufacturing, and they generally, when they measure a process, it's the time to execute on that process. And so for us, execution and timeliness is something that it really ensures that we're not getting any leakage there.
Well, that speed to lead, man, so critical because you said it. If we miss it by a day, they might have walked into the guy who called faster and signed that lease. What's wild, Mark, is I was actually at an event. It was a software company that was sponsoring the event, and they were talking about, because this was a company that served property managers. So they had all this data. Like, in other words, calls would come into their CRM system, right, and be distributed to the appropriate leasing manager to follow up with. And what their data showed is that over 60% of calls either go unresponded to or not called back until over 48 hours later. So somebody calls and inquires about leasing one of your units, and they're not even getting a call. And if they do, it's going to be in like 2 or 3 days. I mean, it's like if an operator that had that going on, maybe it's unbeknownst to them, but they identified that and fixed that one problem, that would probably change their world in ways they
Well,
couldn't
John,
even
like
imagine.
you think about like say a single mom, she's got the kids screaming in the background. She sees an apartment, she's got to move, and she calls in. She wants, and you get a call back 2 days later. Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
Her mind mentally has gone on and totally forgets that. No, I'm using the single mom as a example here,
sure.
but most people are so busy, they got so much going on. Call them back the next day, they forget. But
Yeah,
if you can call them back like right away, then they're in the moment, and you can move them along to that next step and invite them to come in, see the asset, get the application started, and then that way there we can move them along where you're not having to go back and explain. Well, you filled this online form, 2 days ago. And they're like, I've already signed a lease somewhere
yeah, yeah.
somewhere else, right? So
That's right.
100% speed's important.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I saw in the car business, for example, is that the average person goes to 1.5 car dealerships before they make a selection, right? So what does that tell you? The first guy just half the time wasn't closing, right?
Yeah.
So I need to see if I could find that stat. I haven't found one yet. I did a little poking around, but like, how many apartments does the average person visit before selecting one? But I always think of that car example because 1.5, it's just the first guy could have closed it. He just forgot to, or didn't have a strong follow-up
Or
policy
he
or
didn't want
follow-through.
to seem he didn't want to come across as pushy.
Yeah,
Although
that's
that's exactly what they want. They want you to be able to ask them to take that next step. They want to see the end of the movie, so to speak. And I think
yeah,
that is if you believe it's the best community for them, it's your duty to be able to save them from going to another community and potentially getting it wrong.
yeah.
And it's like it's your duty to ask for them and to invite them to take that next step.
Well, and it's that idea that when you find the right property manager and they really firmly believe in their heart what you just said is true, that this is the best community, that's the thing. And so, just like anything else, I would say, if you look at the success of any business, I would say the majority of that success comes from the team, having the right people in the right seat that are working towards the same goal, right?
Well, John,
Nobody does it alone, in other
you
words.
nailed it. If the property manager doesn't love the community and like with their whole heart, they will not sell half as well. Like they will not sell half as well as somebody like so. Our Largo asset, for example, Martha, like she's beaming from love for the property.
Yeah.
He's like she loves it, and so it's like anybody that comes in, she can easily sell that. So having the property manager when you're hiring them, they got to have this like do the tour and see the asset, and then they got to really fall in love with that because if you can do that and they fall in love with the asset, they're going to take it under their arm and they're going to be able to sell it like twice as well as somebody else. Even if you go and take somebody else that doesn't love the property and you're training them to do, they could have the skill set, but it's not in their heart the same way. And they won't sell as well as somebody that's maybe not trained but loves the community. Now, if you take somebody that loves the community and you train them, I mean, that's where you get rocket. We'll
That's
say
it.
fireworks.
That's right. Yeah. So, for example, Trey, one of our property managers, he's up in the Goose Creek property. He lives in the community, right? And he absolutely loves it. So, gosh, you can't make a better salesperson. It's like, I actually am a customer of this
Yeah.
product and I absolutely love it. The marketing is a key component here. It's really the sixth thing. And, one thing we've learned in our business, right, is there's a million different ways you can market things, but go to the platforms that everybody's using. So, like in our world, like residential real estate, it was Zillow, Facebook, right? We knew that's where sellers were on Facebook, buyers on Zillow. In our world, it's really apartments.com. Like apartments.com does tend to be the dominant player. It's got that name, right? People go to that website. Google's another area. So making sure when you go Google our property, the majority of people who find us on Google are actually searching for our property name because they drove by it. So making sure we have great photos there. We're making sure we have great reviews there. We don't incentivize residents to post reviews. We just ask all the time. So if we do a great maintenance service request and we get it done quickly and they're like beaming and happy, hey, would you mind doing a survey for us? It would really mean a lot. So, hitting people when they've had those great experiences is super critical. So, it was interesting. Our Largo property, when we took it over, it had pretty good reviews. It was like averaging 4.1, 4.2 stars. We're up to 4.8 already in just over a year, and it takes a while. I mean, there was 100 plus reviews, so you got to chip away 5 reviews, 5-star reviews at a time, but to get it up that high. So it's just asking at the right moment when we know they're happy and that they're pleased with the service we provided. So your Google page has to look great, your website has to look good, it has to be easy to navigate. You have to have, so for example, we get really great 3D renderings of our units done, so somebody can really get a sense of the unit size, prior to coming out. You talked about those professional photos. We spend, a lot of money to make sure we have the best photos that put the unit in the best possible light, while also avoiding the thing that some people do where they get too Photoshop heavy and make it look like it's not.
Mm,
In other words, I've seen that in residential real
yeah.
estate a lot where I'm like, wow, those are some great Brazilian cherry hardwood floors. And then you go in and you're like, these are like builder grade maple. Like, why do they, why do they look like that? Right. So we present it in its real light, but in its best possible light. Right. So having that professional photographer come through. And we haven't yet played with Facebook Marketplace, but there's some things there you could be doing. But bottom line is our properties are well occupied and we're hitting our rent numbers. So right now, apartments.com is our thing. But once again, I mentioned it earlier. I've gone on apartments.com to look at a building we're potentially considering buying just to get a sense for how it's marketing, what the rents are, what the photos look like. And there's 2 photos. It's like, gosh, put up 45 photos. Your online presence on apartments.com or Zillow or wherever you're posting is your storefront, right? Like
Yeah.
you want to make sure it's the best possible experience when somebody looks at that. So, those 5-star reviews are a big part of it, but making sure that you just have the best photos and everything's presented really well online and your marketing efforts are a critical component.
Hey, John, let's give them a bonus here. So they got the 6, right? So you had the market the right way in the right places. That's 6. Number 5 is streamlining your leasing process and then creating a consistent resident experience. We talked about that with the next one being priced to the market, not just to the pro forma. Let the market dictate what it is, especially when you can overshoot it. Like, go for it, take a swing.
Yep.
Next one is monitoring renewals proactively, so getting ahead of it, and then start with the great tenant screening and onboarding. But one little bonus there is to offer referral programs. So, John, maybe talk a little bit about that before we wrap this conversation up.
Yeah, so we use those strategically. So what'll happen is that I'm going to kind of go back to residential real estate, but it's like the pick your neighbor program. Like, do you know somebody who might want to move into this community? In this situation, what we do is we generally offer a $250 incentive to residents who refer a resident to us that signs that lease. So it gives that resident an opportunity to make a little bit of extra money, but almost more importantly, help choose what their community starts to look and feel like. So maybe a close friend or a coworker that they get along with that they think would be a good fit for the community. We have occasionally bumped it up to $500. There are leasing cycles, not unlike cycles in other businesses. Like, for example, we all know restaurants generally are very slow in January and February. Retail slows down in January and February. We do typically see leasing slow down a little bit towards the holidays. And then like the spring through the fall is when you have your biggest leasing activity. So if we ever find ourselves kind of in the winter months and we want to do something to, juice our, inquiries a little bit, we'll bump it up to $500. But it's a way to, give back to the resident. And, we look at everything, right? So if I'm advertising on apartments.com, there's a cost associated with that. So, there's a cost per resident that comes in, based on our marketing efforts and in all our follow-up efforts. So we track that. So what we found is that $250, sometimes $500, depending on the scenario, is well in line with our typical resident acquisition costs. But it's something we can do that's actually nice for the residents and gives them an opportunity to make a few extra bucks. We've touched on this, but a lot of our residents are working class, middle class, and so gosh, an extra $250 or $500 goes a long way. And so it's just a nice little way to make sure that our residents feel appreciated. They get an opportunity to have some, kind of ownership in a sense of who's coming into the community. And then the bonus really is that if I'm a resident and then like 3 or 4 of my friends live in the community, probably less likely to move out because I like having my friends nearby and having this cool little community feel. So a great little bonus opportunity for those that are listening.
Right on, guys. Well, hope this is a lot of value for you. Even if you have one investment property, there's a lot of key items and insights that you can use from today's conversation to be able to implement right away. Now, if you don't have any in properties, or maybe you do have a number of assets, there are a lot of investors now we're speaking with, and they're like, listen, I'm tired of taking those late night phone calls. Like, I'm tired of managing the property, and I'd rather just partner up. I like the appreciation in properties and I love the cash flow, but I just want somebody to come alongside me and to be able to do this as my partner. And that's where Faris Capital Partners can definitely come in and play that role, where there's no limit to the amount of upside you can get in our deals based on how we structure them. You come on as an actual partner, but you can go to fulloutinvesting.com and you can actually see what a sample deal would look like and what some of the projected returns look like as well, along with our 10-step full out investing process as well. So go to fulloutinvesting.com, check that out. And I really appreciate you guys listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share with other high net worth investors that you think will benefit from it. Thanks for tuning into the Multifamily Investor Playbook. We love and believe in you guys. Keep dreaming and investing big.